Martin, the governor has said in the last 24 hours, I think speaking in Washington, that he is concerned that the Bank of England might be promising too much or allowing too much to be expected of it. Is that a concern you share as well?
Well, I certainly don't think that we've been promising too much, but there is obviously a risk that people feel that central banks can sort out the whole of the world's or the country's problems, and that plainly isn't true. I mean, the governor isn't the only person to have made that point. No, Mr. Vignal from the IMF made the same point very recently.
Do we, given the emphasis that is being placed on monetary policy and the hope that it can achieve maybe more than is feasible, do you think that we fully understand the implications of what very low interest rates are ultimately going to mean? One of the concerns coming out of the IMF meeting is definitely that we're effectively restoking the fire we're trying to put out at the moment.
Well, people have been concerned about that, and if you look at the FPC minutes of their most recent meeting, they are plainly alert to the issue, and they said at the same time that, of course, the situation was nothing like 2007. Well, I'm sure that the FPC will respond to things. The FPC will respond to things before the situation gets anything like that in 2007.
But do you think at this stage we have to have an understanding of sort of exit? Do we have to have a clear roadmap for where we go and how we get there?
Well, in terms of getting or unwinding the effects of asset purchases, then I think in principle I can see how the exit will work. At a time when the economic situation has improved and interest rates have returned to something more normal, then what we will see is that central banks, the Bank of England and others, will announce a gradual programme of selling off their assets. That will be going on in the background, and with that going on in the background, monetary policy decisions will be made by varying the interest rate once again. So in broad terms, that's how I would certainly see the exit, and I don't see why that need come as a dreadful shock to people.
How far away do you think that exit might ultimately end up having to be? We're in a situation where, I'd be interested to get your take on this, the first quarter looks like it's either going to be close to or signalling a contraction. The economy is clearly not making headway, and the IMF once again has warned about that, downgrading its expectations.
Well, no, the prospects for the economy, I think, are somewhat better than they have been recently, but on the question when the bank might think of running off the asset holdings, the only point I would make is that markets aren't expecting even the first increase in bank rate for several years, and I'd be very surprised if the bank were to think of running off the stock of assets before the bank rate had moved appreciably above 0.75%. You want to be in a position where you can provide appreciable stimulus by cutting the interest rate as well as slowing things down by raising it. So certainly if interest rates, if the economy evolves as markets are expecting, then the runoff will be some way in the future.
Just give me your sense of what the current course of the data we're about to get, what they are likely to show.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to wait for the ONS to publish their numbers. It's, after all, not very long to wait.
It certainly isn't. You've kind of hinted about the fact that we have a long wait for the exit to sort of appear into our sort of forward guidance. Forward guidance is something that increasingly people are talking about. What is your understanding of what forward guidance is going to look like, how it's going to work? Do you expect it to have a meaningful impact? Give me your thoughts.
I think if forward guidance were to have an impact, it would have to be giving a signal stronger than people can infer from financial markets anyway. And no, there are two ways in which that might happen. One would be for the MPC to say, actually, we don't think the interest rate will go up until even later than markets are signalling. Now, given how far off the first increase is expected, that would be, I think, a bold statement to make. The other way in which forward guidance might have an impact would be if it affected the behaviour of people who aren't necessarily glued to the financial markets to see what's going on.
I hear people like that exist.
They certainly do.
Looking at the inflation story, are you happy that inflation is anchored at the moment? We're starting to see some evidence in the gilt markets, in the linkers, that maybe inflation expectations are starting to rise.
I can see why inflation expectations should be starting to rise. Indeed, given where inflation has been over the last 5 years, you might say the biggest surprise is that that didn't happen sooner. But equally, if I look at what's going on in the real economy, I'm now starting to see what I regard as fairly favourable signs for inflation. Perhaps the most obvious one is the stability of money wages, that if you look at regular pay, wages have been, money wages have been more or less static since June. If you look at what's been happening to unit labour costs, there were sharp rises actually going back to late 2011, very early 2012, but things have been much more stable recently. If you look at what's happening in commodity markets, obviously that is providing encouraging news. What we have working against that are, of course, the expected movements in administered and regulated prices. But looking at the transactions in the markets that actually have a direct bearing on inflation, I would say that if anything, there has actually been something of an improvement recently.
Would you worry that the current depreciation of sterling that we've been through will have a significant impact on that trajectory of inflation to the upside?
It's certainly one of the factors that affects short to medium term inflation, and it's one of the things that my colleagues and I have been taking into account.
Which side of the ledger is kind of more important? A lower sterling, in theory, should have an impact on rebalancing the economy and letting exports be more competitive, but the import inflation side has had a greater bearing, it seems, on what we've seen over the last few years. How do you understand? Is that dynamic going to change?
Well, that I think nicely illustrates the paradox of policy that the governor first referred to several years ago. Obviously, improved competitiveness relative to the way things had looked late last year is important, but as I say, it may be through no growth in money wages that we do actually gain further competitiveness. In terms of unit costs, things have been improving recently.
When Dr. Carney comes in, do you think, A, the MPC will cut him a little bit of slack, allow him a little bit more room for manoeuvre? The governor's recently been outvoted, as you well know. Do you think there'll be more room for manoeuvre? And what kind of policies would you like to see him think about implementing?
Well, I will look forward to the arguments that he makes for whatever it is he is suggesting. Obviously, I can't predict what that will be at the moment.
But what are your thoughts at this point in time? You've seen what he has to say. You've listened to his comments on both sides of the Atlantic. Is there a sort of sense of you're happy with the overall ideas that he's proposing? Are there issues that you would raise with certain of them?
I think that, all of the general suggestions that he's made need to be seen in the British context. If we were making monetary policy for the United States, life would feel a lot more comfortable than it does here. As with any other suggestions for changes to policy, we need to think about them in the context where inflation has been above target for so long, but also, as I said, in the context where commodity prices are easing and where wage pressures seem to be less than one might have expected.
The toolbox, though, in your mind still has plenty of things in it. There are still plenty of policy instruments that are available to Dr. Carney when he comes in.
Well, the governor in the speech he gave in Washington mentioned the sort of alphabet soup of new schemes that different central banks have introduced in the last 5 years, and it would be absurd to say that there's never going to be a need for anything new, and there's not going to be any further innovation. So, as I say, I will look at things in the context in which we are, which, as I say, is one with a history of high inflation. I can see merit in thinking about ways in which you might try and help particular parts of the economy, but equally I don't think anyone would expect the Monetary Policy Committee to try and become a micromanager for the allocation of credit in the economy.
No, but you bring me on nicely to my last question, which is about funding for lending. Certain sort of portions of the economy, some would argue, have a credit drought, and that needs to be alleviated. Does funding for lending need to be more tailored? It's working very effectively, it seems, in the retail channel. The corporate channel seems to be working less well. Is it living up to expectations there? And what kind of thoughts do you have in terms of tweaking it so it's more effective, extension, duration, etc.?
Well, all I'd like to say on that, which is what was in the minutes, that we can see merit in further revisions, and obviously, as the minutes showed, we are thinking about that.
Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.